A generation ago, all of us who were living then understood that nuclear weapons posed an existential threat to human survival. Unfortunately, when the Cold War ended, we lost that understanding. We all began to behave as though the danger had gone away. It hadn't. There are still 14,000 nuclear warheads in the world today, and over recent years, conditions have changed, and the danger that these weapons will be used has grown dramatically. So that, for example, today, former Secretary of Defense William Perry says that we are closer to nuclear war than we have ever been, closer than we were during the worst moments of the Cold War. The scientific advisory panel at the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists reset their doomsday clock last year to 2 minutes to midnight, the closest it's ever been. They will be resetting the clock again this coming Thursday, and it is likely they will move it even closer to nuclear apocalypse. But we're not paying attention. People around the world have dropped this issue off their radar screens. Back in the 80s, if you asked people what are the major problems facing the world, preventing nuclear war was number one and number two on everybody's list. If you ask that question today, it doesn't appear on anybody's list. And that has to change, because otherwise, terrible things are going to happen. I want to talk a little bit today about what a nuclear war would look like, because we've forgotten that also. And it's terribly important that we understand the enormity of the danger that we face. Let me start by describing to you what would happen in a limited nuclear war, as might happen, for example, between India and Pakistan. About 13 years ago, a group of climate scientists looked at this question, and they imagined that India and Pakistan each used 50 Hiroshima-sized bombs against targets in the other country. Now, many of us have images in our mind of what happened at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the destruction there is a very powerful warning to us of what these weapons can do. But the main thing we need to understand about Hiroshima and Nagasaki is that they do not begin to prepare us for the destruction that will take place if weapons are used today. In the scenario that the climate scientists considered, 100 of these bombs are used, and in a week, 20 million people die. But this local destruction, the fires, the explosions, the radiation, is only a small part of the story, because these 100 explosions start 100 fires and burn 100 cities. And enough soot is thrown into the upper atmosphere to block out the sun and disrupt the climate across the entire planet, cutting agricultural production and triggering a famine across the world that would put up to 2 billion people at risk. Now that was 13 years ago. Just this past September, the same group of scientists updated their study to take into account the dramatic growth in the nuclear arsenals of India and Pakistan, and the growth of the cities that will be burned if these weapons are used. And they are now predicting that a limited war between India and Pakistan that doesn't involve the great nuclear powers would kill 75 to 125 million people in the first week. And the climate disruption would be 3 times greater than that which was previously predicted to put 2 billion people at risk. A war, destruction of this magnitude, would not mean the end of our species, but it would mean the end of civilization as we know it. No civilization in human history has ever withstood a shock of this magnitude, and there's no reason to believe that the very complex and delicate economic system on which we all depend would do any better. This is a limited nuclear war. What happens if the United States and Russia go to war? Let me start by describing what a large-scale attack on a city using modern weapons would look like. Los Angeles would not be hit with a single 15-kiloton bomb as Hiroshima was. It would be hit by 10 or 15 or 20 bombs, each of which would be 30 to 50 times more powerful than the bomb which destroyed Hiroshima. We can conceptualize, we can imagine this destruction using a model of a single 20 megaton explosion. Within 1,000th of a second of the detonation of this bomb, a fireball forms, reaching out for 2 miles in every direction, 4 miles across, Within this area, temperatures reach 20 million degrees, which is hotter than the sun, and everything is vaporized. It simply disappears. The buildings, the trees, the people, the upper level of the earth itself is gone. To a distance of 4 miles in every direction, the explosion generates winds greater than 600 miles per hour and blast pressures greater than 25 pounds per square inch. Mechanical forces of this magnitude destroy anything that human beings can build. To a distance of 6 miles in every direction, the heat is so intense that automobiles melt. And to a distance of 16 miles in every direction, the heat is still so intense that everything flammable burns. Paper, cloth, wood, gasoline, heating oil, it all ignites. Hundreds of thousands of fires, which, over the next half hour, coalesce into a firestorm, 32 miles across, covering over 800 square miles. Within this entire area, the temperatures rise to 1400 degrees Fahrenheit. All of the oxygen is consumed, and every living thing dies. In the case of Los Angeles, we're talking about 6 to 9 million people dead in a half an hour. And if this attack were part of a large-scale war between the United States and Russia, this level of destruction would occur in every major city in both countries, and if NATO were drawn into the conflict, every major city in Canada and Europe. All told, perhaps 200, 300, 400 million people dead in an afternoon. But again, this is only part of the story, because a war of this magnitude puts enough soot into the upper atmosphere to drop temperatures across the planet an average of 8 degrees centigrade. In the interior, that's 14 degrees Fahrenheit. In the interior regions of North America, the temperatures drop 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. We have not seen conditions on this planet like this since the coldest moment of the last ice age, and we would in fact be creating a new man-made nuclear ice age. Under these conditions, all of the ecosystems that have evolved since the end of the last natural ice age would collapse. Food production across the planet would stop. The vast majority of the human race would starve to death. And it is possible that we would become extinct as a species. This is not the plot of a science fiction movie. This is the danger we are living with every day that we allow these weapons to continue to exist. Even if no one in leadership in any of the nuclear-armed states ever makes a deliberate decision to launch nuclear war, there is always the possibility of an accident. And we know of at least 6 occasions, actually 7 occasions, during the nuclear weapons era, when either Moscow or Washington actually began the process of launching their nuclear arsenals in the mistaken belief that they were already under attack by the other side. On each of these occasions, we were not saved by the wisdom of our leaders, or the infallibility of our technology, or the soundness of our military doctrine. We were saved, in the words of former Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, by luck. We lucked out, he said. It was luck that prevented nuclear war. And I would argue to you that the current policy of all the nuclear-armed states is nothing more than a hope for continued good luck. We are living on borrowed time, and we don't know when that time is going to run out. So why talk about this? Because there is something we can do. Nuclear weapons are not a force of nature. It's not like there's some asteroid coming at the planet that we can do nothing about. These are little machines. They're about the size of this podium. We've built them with our own hands, and we know how to take them apart. We've dismantled more than 50,000 of them already, but we just have not had the will to dismantle the rest. And that's where we come in. Fortunately, there is a movement around the world that is building to demand a change, even as we demanded an end to the Cold War arms race back in the 1980s and succeeded. To demand now that these weapons be eliminated altogether so this terrible destruction will not come to pass. Most of the time, when I talk to audiences, the response I get is that people feel a bit overwhelmed. It's a horrible problem. It's an enormous problem. What can I, as a single individual, do, they ask. We in Rotary are not in that situation. We belong to a worldwide family with 1,200,000 members. We can act not as individuals, but as part of this wonderful network, this great sisterhood and brotherhood that spans the entire globe. And so we have a special responsibility to do something. Internationally, nations and civil society have come together and negotiated the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which will ban outright the possession of these weapons, not simply their use, but even possessing them. That treaty was voted for at the United Nations, with which Rotary has a long and strong partnership. It was voted on 122 to 1. 74 nations have signed the treaty so far, and 34 have ratified it. When 50 nations ratify the treaty, it enters into force and becomes international law, and the possession of nuclear weapons will be an offense under international law. Here in the United States, we've launched a parallel campaign called Back from the Brink, which is designed to bring about the fundamental change in U.S. nuclear policy that will enable the United States and the other nuclear-armed states to join in this treaty and eliminate their weapons. The most important aspect of this Back from the Brink platform of policy suggestions is the desire, the request that the United States enter now into negotiations with all 8 other nuclear-armed states for a verifiable, enforceable, time-bound agreement to eliminate their arsenals. These negotiations could begin as soon as the leadership of this country or one of the other nuclear weapons countries decides to exercise leadership and begin this process. And we are calling on constituencies across the country to join in this effort. So far, over 350 organizations, including a number of Rotary clubs, have endorsed this approach, as have the city councils of Los Angeles, Baltimore, Washington, Chicago, Portland, Oregon, Tucson, Salt Lake City, Honolulu, and many others. It's also been endorsed by the state legislature here in California and in Oregon, by the state Senate in Maine, by the State Assembly in New Jersey, and there are similar resolutions before many other state legislatures. There are some in Rotary who have argued that this is not something that Rotary as an organization can do, that it's too political. I would urge them to reconsider that position. Advocating the abolition of nuclear weapons is political in the broadest sense. We're asking for change in policy. But when we advocated for the mass vaccination of children against polio, we also were advocating for policy changes in many countries. And it was not uncontroversial. There were many people who thought vaccination was not a good idea. And in fact, Rotarians who have carried out this work in some countries have come under physical attack. But that didn't stop us from doing something which we knew we had to do to protect the children of the world against polio. It's time for us to stand up now and address an even greater threat to the children of the world, and that's the threat of nuclear annihilation. There are things that we can do right now. Rotarians have come together in a group called Rotarians for a Nuclear Ban. People from that group are here at the meeting, and at the end of this session, we'll be standing at the doors with petitions that you can sign that were circulated by the Hibakusha, the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, calling for the abolition of nuclear weapons. We can also approach our clubs and ask them to get involved as clubs and take this up to the district level and ultimately to Rotary International. It is an essential task and one which we should address. One of the great things about Rotary is that it brings together people from many different cultures and traditions. I was raised in the Jewish faith, and in the Hebrew Bible it says that God said, "Behold, I have set before you life and death. Therefore choose life that you might live and that your children might live." That is literally the choice before us today. And so we need to be sure that we choose wisely and that we act with courage and with determination. undertaking this quest is a great burden when you know that the world is at risk and that you have to play a role in preventing its destruction. It weighs on you. This is a terrible burden to carry around. And all of us share that burden because, we all know this information. But I think we should view this perhaps also as something of a gift. We all joined Rotary because we wanted to give to our communities. We wanted to put service before self. We have been given the opportunity to save the world, and there is no greater service that we can ever do. So let us accept this challenge. Let us, as Rotarians, raise our voice in the cause to eliminate nuclear weapons, and let us together help to save the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Helfand. I believe that he's correct, that we all have a role, and we all need to continue our work in helping him get rid of all the nuclear weapons in the world.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.